Have you ever read something and just felt seen by how offbeat and deadpan the main character was? Well, today I'd like to talk about Konbini Ningen by Sayaka Murata, or, as it's translated in English by Ginny Takemori, Convenience Store Woman. If English isn't your native language and you can't read Japanese, it's also translated in over 30 languages, so you can probably find it in your native tongue as well. Welcome to Sprinkle Word Emporium. Here we discuss translated and untranslated Japanese books. I'm your eponymous guide, Tamara Sprinkle, book enthusiast and Japanese translator. Since childhood, Keiko Kogura never understood why people acted like everything she said and did was wrong. She didn't fit in until one fateful day in university. She applied for a part-time job at a convenience store called Smile Mart. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was part of an ecosystem, like every cell of her existed for this place. Her loving family were relieved at first that she was acting like a normal college student with a job. But as the years went on, her family grew more concerned. 18 years later, Keiko is 36 years old, and she still works at that same store and has never once had a boyfriend. Her coworkers find her competent, and she eats and breathes the convenience store. But everyone around her wonders why she stays in a dead-end job and doesn't get married. Her tactics to explain this away are beginning to show cracks, and her sister is at her wit's end. Keiko starts worrying that she'll be expelled from society when they realize that she's just pretending to be a normal person. Then one day she meets an awkward, misogynistic new employee, Shiraha. None of her coworkers like him. To no one's surprise, after his first few awful days, he gets fired for stalking a female customer. However, that fact does not deter Keiko from proposing that they have a marriage of convenience, so neither of them are expelled from the village as foreign objects. The moment Shiraha starts living with her, everything changes, and the people start treating her like a normal woman with a boyfriend, kickstarting Keiko's journey of self-discovery. Before her success on the international book market, Sayaka Murata had many publications under her belt. Her works have an overarching theme of societal conformity, gendered expectations, asexuality, and what it means to be normal from the perspective of a woman who never fit in and always felt like she was just playing the role of a normal woman. I highly recommend Sayaka Murata's work to anyone who wants to jump headfirst into Japanese feminist literature. So, if she had prior publications, why did this book in particular become so popular? Simply put, it won the Aktagawa Prize in 2016. For those not in the know, the Aktagawa Prize is an award given to promising up-and-coming authors of serious literature. The prize is named after Ryunosuke Aktagawa, a famous Taisho-era writer who wrote Rashomon, among other stories. By winning this prize, authors gain an advantage on the book market. A good illustration of this is the reason why I purchased this book in the first place. It's a process I like to call book roulette. You don't know what you're getting, but it could be exhilarating. Basically at Kikokuniya, which is a Japanese bookstore in San Francisco, I happened upon a prominent display proclaiming this book as an Aktagawa Prize-winning novel. While While focused on the display itself, I was pulled in by this wonderfully intriguing cover and odd title, Konbini Ningen, convenience store person. Could you blame me for being enamored with this image of this concrete tower with all sorts of odd things spilling out of it, like a balloon? You see random skulls down here. There's a balloon. I don't know, is that this may or may not be an explosion. It's a lot to look at. And it all begged the question, what on earth was this about? So I read the description and was sold. And there you go. That, on an individual level, is marketing at work. And that's what the Aktagawa Prize functions as. It doesn't make the book any better or worse, but it does make it more likely for people to look at it and potentially read your novel. Books that are awarded the Aktagawa Prize have a reputation of being somewhat cerebral and difficult to read. However, if you're interested in checking out this book in its original Japanese, the language is very engaging and the sentence structure isn't overly complex. And it mostly uses everyday vocabulary with furigana over the more complex kanji. Although it does use some biological terminology as well. I think this book is appropriate for anyone with an upper intermediate level of Japanese. If your Japanese abilities are at a minimum in 3 level and you want to challenge yourself, I recommend checking this out. Although you should be aware that it would be helpful to know more than the minimum 600 kanji. Still, it's a fairly short novel, so even if some sections pose a bit of a challenge at your current level, it's a good novel to break into Japanese fiction. While reading this story, you can tell that Sayaka Murata herself worked at a convenience store. She made a good point about how they accept all sorts of people, young and old, housewives, college students and artistic people, Japanese people and foreigners. The descriptions make the store come alive, as if that place and its ecosystem is another character within this work. The story even starts with
コンビニエンスストアは夫で満ちってる。客が入ってくるチャイムの夫に、店内を流れる有線放送で新商品を宣伝するアイドルの声。店員の掛け声にバーコードをスキャンする夫。カゴに物を入れる夫。パンの袋が握られる夫に、店内を歩き回るヒールの夫。すべてが混ざり合い、コンビニの夫になって、私の鼓膜にずっと触れている。Or, as it's translated, a convenience store is a world of sound, from the tinkle of the door chime to the voices of TV celebrities advertising new products over the in-store cable network, to the calls of the store workers, the beeps of the barcode scanner, the rustle of the customers picking up items and placing them in baskets, and the clacking of heels walking around the store. It all blends into the convenience store's sound that ceaselessly caresses my eardrums.
The story doesn't diagnose Keiko, which might be for the best, but as Keiko describes the events in her life, you can ascertain that she might be neurodivergent. Not only does she struggle to pick up on social cues, she feels like she belongs at the convenience store because for the first time in her life, she has a manual telling her what to do and how to act. Personally, the straightforward and oddly biological way she talked about the convenience store's ecosystem, marriage, and reproduction struck a chord with me, and is sadly not too far off from some phrasing that I use. For example, initially when she proposed this marriage of convenience, Shiraha said he wasn't sexually attracted to her, and she just got confused, stressing that marriage is just a contract and sex is a physiological reaction. She was just proposing the former, not the latter. Later on, there's a hilarious conversation where Keiko asks if having children is to make humanity as a whole prosper and multiply, since humans are, after all, animals, and the survival of the species is important, and whether she and Shiraha should do their part and mate. I saw myself reflected in how she described mimicking other people's mannerisms as a way to fit in, and staying quiet to play the role society expected of her. At the convenience store, she adopts the way her coworkers speak, picking up their specific phrasing and idiolects to relate better to them, and even buys clothing that's similar to theirs, using them as a reference for what normal people do. Albeit, this is where our similarities end. There are two moments in the story where Keiko shows some rather concerning violent tendencies. In elementary school, she hits a kid with a shovel to stop them from fighting, because all the other kids were shouting for them to stop. I mean, it did work. They did stop fighting, albeit that was probably not the best course of action. And also, in a slightly more concerning scene, her sister is comforting a crying infant, and Keiko glances at a cake knife, thinking about how there are easier ways to quiet the baby, which is somewhat alarming, but I interpreted it more as an intrusive thought and not something she would necessarily act upon. But that might just be me. It's important to recognize that this novel's feminist critique and social commentary is on modern Japanese society, and some aspects of it may not directly map onto other societies. In the Global Gender Gap Report in 2021, Japan was ranked 120 out of 156 countries in a survey that examines economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. Compared to the US, UK, and Belgium, feminism is not quite as mainstream a philosophy in Japan. That being said, it does certainly exist, and things are slowly changing on the ground. Through Keiko's friends and sister were shown examples of societal expectations placed on women in Japan, namely either to pursue a career or to pursue marriage. Although a growing number of companies are adopting flexible hour policies and improved childcare leave to keep women in the workforce, there is a societal expectation that married women will either become housewives or do part-time work, especially once they have children. This is why Keiko would be seen as normal if she got married and then kept working casually at the convenience store, provided, of course, that her husband was the breadwinner. Shiraha is an absolutely detestable and contradictory character. He feels reminiscent of the type of people on 4chan and incels. He has an obsession with the Jomon era, or as it's translated in English, the Stone Age. He spouts off the type of evolutionary psychology bull proclaimed by pickup artists and believes that society has not changed since the Jomon era, that men's roles are to hunt as the women stay home and gather berries. And to fulfill this supposed biological role, he's hunting for a mate. Maybe it's his general patheticness, but despite his lack of any redeeming qualities, the first time I read this, I kept hoping that he'd have some growth as a person, but this is not his story. And maybe this impulse is the reason I've gotten myself into some rather sus situations. Interestingly enough, my partner who researches human trafficking and slavery felt on edge reading these sections. Shiraha, quickly spotting her vulnerabilities and exploiting them, reminded him strongly of how human trafficking is officially defined as exploiting someone's vulnerability. It's fascinating to be inside this very unique mind, seeing all manners of life with the eyes of someone entirely apart from it. It has a certain uncanny quality to it, especially at the end of the story. I found the ending very fitting for the character, and after all, first-person narration tends to be self-revealing, making a conclusion of self-discovery par for the course. However, whether you think it's a happy ending or not depends on how you interpret the overall story. You'll have to check out the book yourself to draw your own conclusions on our unique protagonist and her final declaration. Once you do, I'd love to hear your thoughts and unique perspective. But this is where I leave you. Where you go from here is up to you. I hope to see you next time. Y'all come back now, you hear? Cheers!